For Monique Campbell-Reed, life had fallen into a neat rhythm. The 27-year-old teacher from Kingston had been married barely a year to Devon, her high school sweetheart turned builder and budding businessman. On the surface, everything seemed as it should be. A modest home in Halfway Tree, promises of children on the horizon, and a family name she could finally call her own. When Devon's father, Winston, invited them on an anniversary trip to Montego Bay, Monique felt she'd won the lottery. Winston, retired from construction with a comfortable fortune, reserved a seaside villa perched on a hill that overlooked the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. A celebration, he insisted. For family, for legacy. It sounded like a blessing, a chance to be folded warmly into her husband's family circle. The villa itself embodied Winston's taste for grandeur. Marble floors cooled their bare feet. Tropical flowers filled crystal vases, fragrance heavy in the air. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the endless sea. Winston would often stand by those windows like a king surveying his domain, a glass of aged rum in hand, commanding the room without saying a word. For Monique, it was intoxicating and intimidating. She felt both pampered and scrutinized, as though every laugh and gesture were under watchful appraisal. Devon himself seemed occupied with his father's approval, leaving Monique in long silences at dinners, the sound of cutlery clinking against porcelain marking the gulf between them. At night, lying on freshly pressed linen sheets, Monique would listen to the waves crash against the rocks outside. She should have been at peace. Instead, she felt a subtle restlessness, a sense that the air inside the villa was too heavy, almost charged. Devon slept soundly, lulled by rum and fatigue, but Monique's eyes often scanned the dark corners of the room, uneasy and alert. It was, to all appearances, paradise. Yet beneath the surface, tension curled like smoke. This family vacation, their dream trip, was already planting seeds that none of them could see. Seeds that, in time, would grow into betrayal, violence, and blood. Winston Reed moved through the villa like he owned not just the house, but the very air inside it. At 58, his salt and pepper hair and pressed linen shirts gave him an aura that was both dignified and intimidating. His reputation in Kingston had been forged over decades. Builder, patriarch, respected man. But at home, to his family, Winston's presence meant caution, as if all emotions needed to shift to accommodate him. Monique noticed it early, how the staff addressed him with extra deference and how Devon, her husband, straightened up in his father's presence as though still seeking approval. She watched them chat on the veranda, Winston's hand heavy on Devon's shoulder, his words encouraging yet edged with judgment, always reminding him of the shoes he'd hoped his son would fill. At dinners, Winston steered the conversation with stories of his youth. A different Jamaica, he declared, days of scarcity and struggle, of building something from nothing. He would glance at Monique, his eyes sliding over her as if appraising a purchase, then smile a little too long. "You're bringing luck to the Reed family, my dear," he'd say, and though the others would laugh, Monique felt a prickle at the base of her neck. Devon was preoccupied with business calls and endless messages, trying to impress his father, leaving Monique and Winston with uncomfortably long silences. These moments grew more frequent. A chat over breakfast, a stray hand lingering during a game of dominoes, a late-night encounter in the kitchen after the others had retired. There was power in Winston's attention, intoxicating and confusing. When he spoke, his voice was low, the kind reserved for secrets. He paid her compliments laced with hidden meanings. The boundaries of their conversations shifted from harmless anecdotes to personal inquiries about Monique's hopes, her dreams, her loneliness. Monique felt herself drawn and repelled, caught between loyalty and something she refused to name. With every passing day, the air in the villa thickened, the pressure building beneath the surface. Winston was circling closer, and Monique sensed something was about to break. Monique moved through the villa each day as if in a beautiful haze. From dawn, the sunlight turned the marble floors gold. The salt in the air gave her skin its own glow. Still, she could never quite unclench her shoulders. Winston's presence seemed to expand, filling even those quiet hours between breakfast and lunch when the sea sang and the house should have felt peaceful. One afternoon, the house was nearly empty. Devon had gone into town with his mother to visit relatives. Winston stayed behind, claiming a headache. Monique wanted to slip away to her room with a book, but Winston intercepted her in the hallway. "You running off to hide, girl?" His tone was playful, but he blocked her path. She shook her head, moving to the side. "Just wanted a bit of time with my stories." He laughed, a sound that seemed to command attention. "Stories? What about real life, eh? What about this place, this family? You should enjoy. These days don't last forever, Monique." She tried to smile, noting the sharpness in his gaze. He reached out, gently, almost fatherly, and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She tensed. Winston leaned in closer. "You know, you remind me of a woman I once knew, years before Devon was born. She had your fire, your trouble in her eyes." He chuckled, tone suddenly confidential. "Sometimes a man marries for peace, but he finds himself longing for that fire all over again." She stepped back, heart thudding. "Thank you, Daddy Winston. I should go lay down." His hand caught hers. "Just for a moment, just long enough. Don't waste your good years in shadows, Monique. A woman like you is meant for sunshine." Monique retreated, pulse racing. The villa felt suddenly claustrophobic, like a trap built of expensive stone and floral arrangements. As she closed her bedroom door, she spotted herself in the mirror, saw the confusion in her own eyes, the uncertainty blooming where innocence once lived. Days blurred after that. At dinner, Winston's foot would brush against hers under the table. Maybe by accident, maybe not. His compliments, given softly and always when Devon was distracted, began to scrape against the boundaries she had set for herself. Devon was hardly present. He spent evenings on the veranda, phone pressed to his ear, chasing deals that Winston had promised were within reach if only he put in the work. Monique's loneliness became palpable, a fog that no sunlight could chase away. One night, after midnight, Monique crept down the hall in search of water. She found Winston in the kitchen, barefoot, swirling a glass of rum, staring out at the moonlit bay. He offered her a slow smile. "Can't sleep either?" She hesitated, hand gripping the counter. "No, just needed a drink." He didn't say anything for a long moment, watching her pour water from the jug. Then softly, "Do you ever feel invisible here, Monique? Like everyone only notices you when they want something?" She couldn't help but nod. "Sometimes. I think that's just part of being new." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You're not invisible, you know. I see you. I see you for who you are." She froze, mug halfway to her mouth. 1,000 protests died in her throat. The room was silent except for the humming of the fridge and the gentle clink of ice in his glass. Before she could retreat, he reached for her. Still gentle, still fatherly in appearance but unmistakably intimate in intention. His hand closed over hers, lingered. Their eyes met, and Monique felt that line. The invisible line she was sure she'd never cross, waver. She pulled her hand away and fled, leaving the taste of fear, and something darker, in the back of her throat. Nothing happened that night, but she knew something had changed. In the days that followed, the invitations became more brazen, the private moments harder to escape. Monique felt herself unraveling, her secrets binding her tighter each day. The villa, once a dream, felt more like a gilded cage. And Winston Reed was always waiting, always watching. The weeks following the trip back to Kingston unraveled Monique's carefully balanced world. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just nausea from a passing illness, an upset stomach from the rich foods at the villa. But the morning sickness persisted, shadows beneath her eyes growing heavier each day. One early morning, a faint line appeared on the tiny test she had been too afraid to take. 2 lines. She stared at it in disbelief, heart pounding like thunder in an empty church. The realization crashed down. She was pregnant. Monique's mind raced. Devon was the obvious father, her loving husband with deep brown eyes she had once trusted with every part of herself. But a second, darker truth flickered at the edges of her consciousness. The nights with Winston, the touch she wished never happened, the tangled moments she still desperately tried to bury. She hid the news from Devon, wore loose dresses and moved cautiously, afraid to share the secret blossoming inside her. But secrets have a way of unraveling, and her changed behavior did not go unnoticed. "Monique, what's wrong?" Devon's voice was heavy with concern one evening. His fingers brushed hers across the kitchen table, searching for answers in her unwilling silence. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. "They say pregnancy makes you moody." He tried to smile, but the worry in his eyes deepened. I'm not sure," she admitted, tears breaking free. "Devon, I don't know whose child this is." Silence fell between them like a shroud. After years of trust, the foundation of their marriage seemed to crack in one sharp moment. Devon's confusion soon hardened into something colder. "What do you mean, Monique? What are you saying?" I need time to get through this," she whispered. "I'm scared." Days turned into tense weeks of avoidance and carefully guarded conversations. Monique met with doctors in secret, seeking tests and answers. The fear of a DNA test loomed like a storm cloud. The thought of facing Winston, of confronting the man who had blurred every line she knew, was unbearable. Winston himself avoided the topic entirely when they crossed paths. His smiles were tighter, his gaze more furtive. But Monique saw in him a flicker of something, shame, perhaps, or fear, hidden behind the mask of control. The villa in Montego Bay no longer felt like a distant memory. It hovered over her present, a dark stain on the bright wax of her life. She was trapped between the life she wanted and the nightmare that was unfolding. A nightmare where love, family, and loyalty were weaponized in ways she never imagined. And as the days passed, one question echoed louder than all the rest. What price would she pay for the truth? The fragile walls of silence that Monique and Devon had tried to build began to crumble from a single careless word. It was during a late summer gathering at Winston's home in Portmore, a celebration meant to mask the growing cracks beneath the facade of family unity. The air was thick with music and rum, the laughter loud but hollow. The neighbors' children played at the edges of the garden, while inside, the adults exchanged polite nods and hollow compliments. Winston, usually a picture of controlled authority, appeared loosened by the alcohol, the heavy drink unraveling his carefully constructed mask. He leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, eyes glinting with something unspoken. "You know," he said loudly enough for only a few to hear, his voice heavy yet trembling. "Sometimes family carries complications, like a bond too strange to mention." The words hung in the air, a sharp blade wrapped in menace. Monique, feigning laughter nearby, caught the glance Devon shot Winston, eyes dark with confusion and suspicion. But Devon chose to dismiss it, chalking it up to drink-induced rambling. Later that night, alone in their small bedroom, the truth seeped from the cracks. Devon's voice was low, brittle with disbelief. "Is there something you're not telling me, Monique?" She sat trembling, the weight of the secret too immense to bear alone. Finally, with a voice barely above a whisper, "I'm scared, Devon. I'm pregnant. But I don't know who the father is." The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with betrayal. Devon's hand shook as he pushed the hair from his forehead, struggling to process the revelation. "You mean, it could be him? My father? I don't know," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." His world shattered in that moment. Love, trust, family honor, all breaking like shards of glass. The following days were a whirlwind. Rumors spread through the neighborhood, whispered behind cupped hands and over fences. Monique withdrew from friends and family, caught in the crossfire of shame and fear. Devon oscillated between anger and devastation, navigating a maelstrom of emotions that threatened to consume him. Winston, meanwhile, grew distant, retreating into a cold silence that was more frightening than his previous charm. The man who once held the family's reins was now a ghost, elusive and unreachable. A private investigator was hired discreetly, DNA tests arranged in secret. The truth, once uncovered, would cost more than any of them could imagine. fracturing not only marriages but the very foundation of what they believed family to be. In the shadows of the scandal, Monique's world collapsed further. She felt the eyes of the city upon her, a mix of pity, judgment, and whispered condemnation. The dream trip, the fairy tale of a new beginning, had become a nightmare etched into every corner of her existence. The August night air was heavy with the scent of rain and salt, a storm waiting to break. Inside Devon's modest home in Portmore, silence screamed louder than any argument could. Monique sat on the edge of the sofa, hands trembling as she replayed the events of the past weeks in her mind. All the whispered accusations, the shattered trust, the unbearable weight of the secret child growing in her. Devon paced the room, every step a thunderclap of frustration and pain. His voice, usually tempered, roared like a tempest as he dialed his father's number for what felt like the 100th time that day. "Pick up, Winston," he barked into the phone. "Pick up your damn phone." But Winston remained unreachable, as if retreating into a fortress built from denial and silence. Finally, desperate and furious, Devon stormed out of the house towards his father's mansion just a short drive away. The street lamps flickered, casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers as he stormed up the driveway, heart pounding against his ribs like a wild drum. Neighbors heard shouting long before they saw the figures silhouetted against the grand front door. Voices clashed, a raging symphony of betrayal and accusation. Monique, clutching her abdomen, trailed behind, her tears falling cold in the humid air, begging for peace that was nowhere to be found. What kind of man does this to his own family? Devon's voice cracked as he confronted Winston. "How could you betray me? Betray her?" Winston's face was a mask, half defiance, half regret. "You don't understand, son. Sometimes the line between love and destruction blurs." The argument spiraled beyond words. Fists clenched, rage flared. In a horrifying instant, the tension exploded. A punch thrown, a stumble, a fall. Blood spilled across the marble floor like a cruel mirror of the family's broken vows. Neighbors called in panic when the screams echoed through the night. Police arrived to find Winston collapsed in a growing pool of blood, Devon trembling beside him, hands stained with red, and Monique sobbing uncontrollably, the horror of what just happened sinking deep into her soul. Emergency services rushed Winston to the hospital, but the damage was grave. What began as a storm of words ended in tragedy, one that would haunt the family and the nation for years to come. The courtroom was suffused with a tense, electric silence as the trial of Devon Reed began. A case so bitterly personal, so suffused with betrayal, it gripped the entire nation. The story of a dream trip turned nightmare played out like a tragic drama on the polished floors of the parish courthouse. An impossible blend of family love and violent destruction. Devon sat at the defendant's table, his gaze hollow yet fierce. His defense attorney painted a portrait of a man broken by betrayal, a son betrayed by his own father and wife. "We are not here to punish a man who acted out of unbearable pain and humiliation," the lawyer argued, voice steady but charged with emotion. Monique sat in the gallery, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The DNA results had been clear. The child she carried belonged to Winston Reed. Her very presence in the courtroom was a testament to unresolved pain and the price of silence. She listened as prosecutors detailed the ruptures of trust that led inexorably to that violent August night. Witness after witness recounted the unraveling of a family. Friends, relatives, neighbors painted a portrait of a man pushed beyond his limits, grappling with a shattering reality too cruel to accept. The prosecution emphasized the destructive power of secrets and the devastating consequences of actions born from betrayal. Winston Reed lay in hospital, silent and unreachable, the patriarch confined to a bed as the family he once commanded crumbled around him. The judge, stern but compassionate, reminded all present that justice sought not just punishment, but understanding. The complex human failures that often lie at the heart of tragedy. Months later, Devon was sentenced. His punishment was severe, but tempered by the acknowledgement of provocation and overwhelming emotional torment. As he was led away in handcuffs, the weight of his actions and their consequences settled over the courtroom like a dark cloud. Monique gave birth to a daughter in a quiet hospital ward. The child, innocent and unaware, became a symbol of a fractured family and a difficult legacy. She bore a name that honored none but herself, a reminder of the tangled roots from which she came. The tragedy opened a fierce public conversation across Jamaica about family loyalty, about the scars left by silence and betrayal, about the dark places where love turns to violence. For Monique, the past would always echo, a wound raw and unhealed. The dream trip, once full of promise, had ended in blood and heartbreak, and the shadows of that August night would follow them all forever.